Continuing now with Dave Barry's Class Clown, the memoirs of a professional wise ass. So in this session, we begin with Chapter 6, Politics. And the chapter begins with this sign proclaiming Dave Barry for president. It's time we demanded less. Typical Dave Barry. Self-deprecating. In February of 1984, the Miami Herald sent me to New Hampshire to write columns about the New Hampshire presidential primary. Footnote adds, of course, the Herald also sent actual journalists to New Hampshire. The main one was political editor Tom Fiedler, an excellent reporter and writer. Not everybody at the Herald thought this was a good idea, sending Dave. I was in Miami when the decision was made, and one of the newsroom editors, an old-school hard-ass, summoned me into his office and, by way of an icebreaker, said, "Are you a flake?" I asked him what he meant. What he meant was, could I, a humorist producing a goofy and sometimes wildly non-factual weekly column for the frequently weird Tropic magazine, be relied upon to produce daily columns on deadline about a major news story to be published in the front section, the serious section, of the newspaper? I told him I used to be a real reporter, and I thought I could produce on deadline. He still seemed doubtful, and as I later learned, he was not alone. But Heath Merriweather, the Herald's executive editor, was in favor of sending me, so I went. I spent 2 weeks on the campaign trail in New Hampshire. I stayed on the outskirts of Manchester in an old motel, the kind of place where the instant you open your door, you're outside. I had no guidance on how to cover a primary election, but I had a rental car, a map, and the Manchester Union Leader, which every day published a schedule of candidate appearances. I drove all around the state. It's a small state, usually attending 2 or 3 campaign events a day, looking for humor fodder. At night, I went to the Sheraton Wayfarer, a hotel in Bedford, where pretty much the entire National Political Press Corps gathered at the bar. Back then, print journalists usually wrote one thing a day, so after they filled their stories or columns, they'd go to the Wayfarer to have a cocktail or 3, discuss the political situation with other press corps members, and, drawing on their vast storehouse of experience and knowledge, formulate the conventional wisdom, which would then appear in various forms in almost every newspaper in the nation, and which quite often was wrong. Today, because of social media and the 24-hour news cycle and the fact that everybody has the attention span of a gnat, political reporters can never stop reporting, tweeting, or whatever it's called now, and retweeting, so they don't get to unwind. They're too busy staring at screens. They don't drink as much as the old press corps did, and they have way more access to all kinds of scientific polling data. But as far as I can tell, they're wrong just as often. And they don't have the camaraderie of the Sheraton Wayfarer. Or if they do, they never invite me. Which is sad for them because it was pretty neat. It was pretty great. It was the Oscars for political junkies. You'd see the superstars of punditry holding court, the big feet, guys, they were mostly guys, such as R.W. Johnny Apple, David Broder, Dan Balls, Jack Germond, Joe Klein, and Curtis Wilkie. You'd see political reporters from all the big papers, wondrously cynical people who had been around, it seemed. All right. Sometimes I need to read ahead while I'm reading, so I can see what emphasis to put or how to keep going. Anyway, let's go back and read that again. You'd see political reporters from all the big papers, wondrously cynical people who'd been around, it seemed, since Lincoln debated Douglas. You'd also see campaign staffers and hired gun consultants working the crowd. Sometimes an actual candidate would show up. As Election Day got close, you'd see more network TV people. You might see Tom Brokaw, sitting at the bar like a regular person. I enjoyed the scene at the Wayfarer, but the real entertainment in New Hampshire was out on the campaign trail, where the candidates and the voters performed a kind of campaign kabuki. A typical event would have a candidate showing up at some random venue, a restaurant, a factory, somebody's house, a shopping mall, a bowling alley, where some New Hampshire voters had gathered, motivated by a sincere desire to meet the candidate and or obtain free food. Usually the candidate would arrive at the event late, exhausted and hoarse, suffering from some kind of lingering viral infection after too many 17-hour days on the campaign trail, but smiling like a lunatic on speed. The candidate would be accompanied by several unsmiling staff people who were even sicker and more tired than the candidate, and a clot of grumpy press people also unhealthy from living on a diet of fast food while spending weeks on end attached remora-like to the candidate, following him all over the winding roads of New Hampshire, a place they had come to loathe, in crowded vans scented with Egg McMuffin farts en route to yet another campaign event where they must listen to the candidate, whom they had also come to loathe, reiterate for the 7,000th time his 6-point plan to revitalize the American economy, after which he'd pretend to give a shit about the questions from the flinty New Hampshire voters whom everybody, candidate, staff, and press corps, had come to loathe. Often, to complete the kabuki, the candidate would do something visual for the cameras, hold a baby, or eat some weird local dish such as poutine, P-O-U-T-I-N-E, bowl, put on a hat, flip pancakes, or engage in some other demeaning activity utterly unrelated to being chief executive of the United States. The saddest candidate events were the ones where the voters failed to show up. For example, one of my first columns from New Hampshire was about the campaign of Reuben Askew, a former Florida governor who was one of a half dozen people seeking the Democratic nomination. And in a footnote, he adds, Ronald Reagan was running for re-election, so there was no real race on the Republican side. He had an excellent resume and absolutely no chance. This is a recurring feature of presidential campaigns. Politicians who have all kinds of solid qualifications, politicians who could undoubtedly do a competent job of being president, but who for various reasons, such as in Askew's case, an almost life-threatening lack of charisma, fail to fire up the public. These are confident people, winners, governors, and senators who have always succeeded in their endeavors, and they've convinced themselves that if the voters got to see them in person, got to look them in the eye and hear them explain their vision for the future, their blueprint for America, their 6-point or 7-point or even 8-point plan, then by God, those voters would be won over. There would be a groundswell. Why not? It happened to Jimmy Carter. And so these successful, confident winners had head hopefully to New Hampshire, only to have their presidential aspirations crushed like a bunny rabbit under an anvil. That's what was happening to Askew the day I saw him. And this is what Barry wrote. I caught up with the Reuben Askew campaign in Concord, where he was touring a shopping center and attracting about as much attention as a demonstration of nonstick cooking pots. It was a sad thing to watch. He has this knot of reporters around him, and they keep asking him in about 700,000 different ways if he plans to drop out of the race, and he's trying to get through them to find a voter or two to shake hands with. I wanted to go up and give him a big hug. Askew dropped out after finishing last in New Hampshire. Another candidate who did not do well there was John Glenn, the U.S. Senator from Ohio and former astronaut. He'd been expected to be a strong challenger for the Democratic nomination, but he was struggling, as I wrote. I went to downtown Manchester to watch the John Glenn campaign falter. These days, we professional journalists refer to it formally as the faltering Glenn campaign, because Glenn is trailing Walter Mondale in the polls. Don't get me wrong here. I like Glenn fine. It's just that he doesn't electrify the crowd, if you know what I mean. I doubt he could electrify a fish tank if he threw a toaster into it. My primary coverage, especially the column about Glenn and the toaster, upset some people at the Herald. While I was still in New Hampshire, I got a call from Heath Merriweather, the Herald's executive editor. He wrote a weekly column, and he decided to make it about me that week. He'd received a memo from a member of the Herald's editorial board who thought my New Hampshire columns did not belong on the news pages next to our serious campaign reporting. Heath read me the memo, which said in part, quote, "When we treat so prominently such serious business as if it were pratfall comedy, I believe that we demean our reputation as a serious newspaper. I seriously believe that such treatment reassures the public that cynicism about politics is smart. I don't believe that that's what good newspapers should do," end quote. Heath asked for my response, which was basically, if you think there's nothing comedic about the New Hampshire primary, you really should come up here and see it in person. As for whether it's smart to be cynical about politics, my feeling was and still is, Nobody could possibly be more cynical about our political system than our politicians. In any event, the Herald let me continue writing political columns, and in the summer of 1984, I went to the national conventions. The Democrats convened in San Francisco, where I filed this report. For the benefit of those of you who are just now emerging from comas, the big news here is that Walter Mondale has chosen New York Representative Geraldine Ferraro, an avowed woman, to be his running mate. This followed a lengthy selection process in which Mondale invited members of every popular minority group to his home, where he would interview them to find out if they were compatible with his views. Mondale: "So tell me, which minority group do you belong to?" "I'm a black person." "Fine, and how long have you been a member of that particular group?" 47 years. "Very good. Now, as you can see, my aides have arranged a complete set of my views over on the dining table. Do you see any view that you would be incompatible with?" Let's see. That one looks okay, and that one, and could you step it up a bit? Because very frankly, we have minority groups backed out onto the lawn." I also wrote about the street demonstrations in San Francisco. There are always demonstrations going on outside political conventions, and they never seem to accomplish anything beyond annoying the people who aren't in them. Meanwhile, out on the streets, large clots of people continue to barge around with signs demanding that somebody do something about something. The largest clots to date have consisted of organized labor and the gays, both of whom held huge marches to dramatize their demands. Their demands were: organized labor, Ronald Reagan should be placed in a dumpster and then it should be filled with concrete. The gays, and then it should be dropped from a tremendous height onto the Reverend Jerry Falwell. The Republicans held their convention in Dallas, where they renominated Ronald Reagan in a climactic extravaganza of red, white, and blue Mylar confetti falling onto a horde of wholesome flag-waving youths. As I explained, the reason for all the Mylar and young people, of course, is that the Republicans want to reclaim the indoor record for mindless patriotism displays, which was taken from them last month in a surprise move by the Democrats in San Francisco. Time was when the Democrats were no competition in terms of patriotism. They were always nominating their presidential candidates at 3 a.m. amidst clouds of marijuana smoke, and it was always somebody like George McGovern who would make a speech where he'd call on Cuba to invade the United States, and for the closing ceremony they'd have Eldridge Cleaver spit on a Bible. But recently, Democratic Party officials detected a new surge of national pride caused by patriotic Olympics-related beer commercials. So at their convention, they distributed thousands of flags to the delegates to wave in a patriotic fashion. It had been a long time since Democrats waved flags, so they were a little rusty at first. No, you hold it by the stick end. But eventually they got the hang of it, and they went on to set a record for mindless patriotism displays, surpassing anything seen in this country since 1845, when we invaded Mexico solely on the basis that it was a foreign country. I found the Republican convention delegates to be especially entertaining. Those of you who are still awake may have noted that at the end of the Republican convention, Ray Charles sang "America the Beautiful." My question is, does this mean that Ray Charles is a Republican? That Ray Charles belongs to the party of Wayne Newton? I raise this issue because of the way Republican delegates clap to music. Let's take, for example, a song like "Hit the Road, Jack." A normal person or Democrat would clap to this song as follows: "Hit the road, clap, Jack." But a Republican delegate would clap right smack dab on the word road, as in, hit the clap, Jack. I suggest you try this a few times in the privacy of your home or apartment so you'll understand how Republican delegates clap. It is a style of clapping that is compatible only with songs from the original cast recording of The Sound of Music, and I doubt that all the Republican delegates and alternates added together own more than 4 Ray Charles albums. I got some angry mail about my political columns. It was pretty much evenly divided between letters from Republicans who thought I was an idiot liberal communist Democrat and letters from Democrats who thought I was an idiot conservative fascist Republican. A footnote, he adds, "For the record, I am neither. I'm an idiot libertarian." But a lot of other readers seemed to enjoy my coverage, and I'd found that I really enjoyed writing about presidential campaigns. So from then on, every 4 years until COVID struck in 2020, I usually went to the Iowa caucuses, the New Hampshire primary, and both national conventions. Thus, in 1988, I was in Atlanta for the Democratic Convention. Since the ticket, Michael Dukakis and Lloyd Bentsen, had already been decided, there was no chance that any actual news would occur. Nevertheless, a massive press corps was on hand, which meant that virtually any trivial thing that happened got an absurd amount of coverage. I personally witnessed this phenomenon one afternoon in the designated protest zone near the convention hall. A young woman was wandering through the area holding a pet rat, and almost immediately she was surrounded by TV camera crews. I counted 5 of them. That night I saw her on one of the local TV news shows, and not at the end of the broadcast where they put the fluff. It was one of the top stories from the convention. Woman with rat. I thought that was ridiculous, so I decided to run an experiment. I enlisted the aid of 2 of my fellow newspaper columnists, Eric Lacetis of the Seattle Times and Bob Morris of the Orlando Sentinel. We got some cardboard boxes and cut holes in them for our eyes. Then we went out to the protest zone, put the boxes on our heads, and formed a little triangle facing outward. So that was the scene, 3 guys standing around with boxes on their heads. I later wrote a column about what happened next. It took 7 seconds for the first newspaper photographer to take our picture. Within minutes, I'm not making any of this up, we were surrounded by TV people, radio people, and various other media people wishing to conduct interviews, which generally went like this. Media person: who are you? Demonstrator: we're an organization called People with Boxes on Their Heads. Why do you wear boxes on your heads? Basically because that's the name of our organization. People with boxes on their heads. Another demonstrator, helpfully: it's an organization of people who have boxes on their heads. And so on. We gave several dozen interviews and were photographed hundreds of times. I don't know how many interviews got broadcast, but our pictures were in at least 2 Georgia newspapers and the Baltimore Sun, and were included with a nice write-up about the rally that went out nationwide on the Associated Press wire. This was true. The people with boxes on their heads were the lead item in the AP roundup of convention protests. There was also a widely circulated photo of the 3 of us in our little triangle, surrounded by a mob of media people with cameras and microphones. Eric and Bob also wrote columns about our experiment, so by the next day we'd received a lot of publicity. Not everybody was amused. I got phone calls in the press center from maybe a dozen newspaper people. Some of them, the ones from papers that had printed the Boxhead protest story, were pretty angry. They wanted to know how come we had hoaxed the media. My position was, we didn't hoax anybody. We had boxes on our heads, and we said we had boxes on our heads. You're the ones who decided this was a national news story. Was I wrong? Had we in fact crossed an ethical line? Were we making a mockery of the press, an institution vital to our democracy? Maybe, but it was pretty funny. One of my favorite political columns from the 1990s didn't come from a presidential campaign. It came from the 1991 Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on Clarence Thomas's nomination to the Supreme Court, after Anita Hill accused Thomas of sexual harassment. This was a huge news story. The entire nation pretty much shut down to watch the hearings on TV. It was a serious subject, of course, but it was also highly entertaining because of the personalities on the committee, including Joe Biden, who absolutely loved to hear himself talk; Ted Kennedy, who, having had a few scandals of his own, was trying to keep a low profile; Orrin Hatch, who was hilariously prissy; Hal Heflin, who spoke very slowly; and Strom Thurmond, who spoke a language I would call unintelligible Southern. This was an easy column to write. It took me maybe an hour. It's technically a parody, but honestly, it's not all that different from how the hearings sounded. Chairman Biden: Judge Thomas, these past few days have been very, very hard for all of us, especially my good friend and colleague, Senator Kennedy, because it is not easy for a man to sit through the 3 full days of hearings with a paper bag over his head. But before we let you go, there's just one more point I want to make, and it is a very, very important point, and I fully intend to make it if I ever get to the end of this sentence, which, as you know and I know, Judge, is highly unlikely to occur during the current fiscal year. So, Senator Hatch: I want to say that I'm disgusted. These are disgusting things that we have been talking about here, and I personally am disgusted by them. Pubic hair, big organs, disgusting, and yet we must talk about them. We must get to the bottom of this, no matter how disgusted we are, and believe me, I am. We must talk about these matters, the pubic hair and the big organs, huge organs, because it just makes us sick to think that these kinds of matters would come up. I refer here to the organs and the hairs. That we here in the United States Senate would find ourselves delving deeply into these matters, to be frank, totally disgusts me. Both aspects of it, the hair aspect and the organ. Chairman Biden: thank you. Senator Heflin, Judge Thomas, 30-second pause. I certainly appreciate, 45-second pause. The fact, 20-second pause, that 3-minute, 20-second pause. My time is up. Senator Thurmond, someone being cooter and wouldn't tell him this is a drag. It's the best I can translate what he wrote here. Translator. He says, somebody has colored my hair with what appears to be Tang breakfast drink. Chairman Biden, thank you. May I just add that the top of my own personal head appears to be an unsuccessful attempt to grow okra. But Judge, as soon as I make this one final point, we're going to let you go because this has been very, very painful. And believe me, I know what pain is because at one time in my career, I was the son of a Welsh coal miner. And let me just say, Judge, that when I do make this point, whatever it will be something that I believe in very, very deeply because I'm the chairman and I can talk as long as I want using an infinite number of dependent clauses and nobody can stop me. Senator Hatch, how big an organ? How many pubic hairs? These are the issues that we need to probe deeply into no matter how much they disgust us. And believe me, nobody is more disgusted than I am. I am revolted that we are thinking about these disgusting things day and night. Tossing and turning, trying to sleep, writhing and moaning, and Senator Kennedy from under his bag. Are the cameras still here? Chairman Biden, Judge, we know you're tired, and we're going to let you go in just a moment here, just as soon as I make this one point. Senator Thurmond, did we lost you up? Translator, he says, did we eat lunch yet? So that was quite a show. But for quality political entertainment, it was hard to beat the presidency of Bill Clinton, which was like let's see. I'm going to see how much longer I have in this chapter if we've gone over the 20-minute mark. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm going to stop right here. We'll take up in the next session in the middle of this chapter, which is chapter 6, politics. We'll take up where we just left off after the Clarence Thomas column and on to Bill Clinton. Thank you for watching.